What's up, Casper fam? Check this out. Pap! FBI, open up! Would you love to learn this opening trick to trap your opponent's queen in the opening stage? Well, stay tuned and watch up to the end, because after the short game that you're about to watch, I'm going to give you a short tutorial on how to achieve something like this and how to punish anyone who tries to play the King's Indian, the modern, or the Pirc defense against you. Stay tuned. Let's do this. I rarely play d4 openings, and one thing I love about these openings is, there's a high probability for black to play the King's Indian defense, like what we are seeing on the board. So let me convert this or transpose this to the BN variation of the Pirc. So, yep, e4, then I'm going to play bishop g5, if pawn to g6, yep. So if bishop g7, game over. So now from here, I'll stop thinking and start pre-moving. Okay, so I was expecting my opponent to take. Now, let me just show you another little trick you can try from here. The idea is to go knight d5 and take this pawn. Then win the queen. So I guess my opponent is going to play something like knight c6, only move, after which I'm going to play bishop b5. Looks like my opponent is a bit confused, and that's a good sign. By the way, this is not the best way to go about this. Okay, my opponent already made a silly blunder. They were supposed to go knight c6, not pawn to c6. I'll show you what to do after black plays knight c6. Of course, you're supposed to play bishop b5 and something like that, but let's focus on this move first. Pawn to c6 is bad due to knight takes e7. Looks like this pawn to h6. Okay, so if my opponent played maybe pawn to h6, I was going to play bishop h4. And if g5 was played, I was just going to take the last square bishop. That's it. And then take back on d6. Yep. So my opponent just played queen a5, check. But I guess I can just retreat my dark square bishop. So what we are seeing is lack of opening knowledge from my opponent's side. That's not an insult. If anything, it is a call for improvement. My opponent needs to study their openings. So now I can safely take on d6, maintaining that knight. By the way, black can't, cast a shot. Okay, now they want to take my pawn. Is there any way I can hold on to that? I'm thinking of going bishop f4. Or maybe bishop b4, yep. Because that will indirectly attack the rook in case of castle shot. At the moment, black can't castle shot. It is always good to know your openings, guys. That helps a lot, especially when it comes to identifying some common traps and tricks. Now I can put back my bishop, to c5. I'm thinking of playing, because of knight a6, I'm thinking of playing pawn to b3. Pawn to c3, so that if pawn to b4 is played, I just take. Yep, I can just take and take back. If ab, What am I doing with my arrows today? Okay, that's another big blunder due to knight takes, right? Yeah, I can just take. And I have queen check in the near future. That I don't know what my opponent is doing. And I don't know what I'm doing with my arrows today. Maybe it's because I'm hungry. Time is ticking. This is why it is important to subscribe to my channel so that you learn as many openings as possible. Clearly, my opponent is not a KaspaChess subscriber, so they have to pay for it. Then develop my light squad bishop. This is logical to stop queen e6 check. If pawn takes, I have bishop takes check. My bishop on a3 is stopping black from castling. And this is a rated match, by the way. I hope leeches won't restrict my account again for rating manipulation. My argument here is this is not a speed run, so I'm not milking anybody's rating. Because normally you are not supposed to use your original account for speed runs. Knight f3, but this is not a speed run, it's just a random match and I'm streaming it. Now I can put my king to safety because there's queen e6 check. That will probably make my king lose its right to castle. So castle short, I have that. Black can't castle short, by the way. I don't know what this is up to, but I can just take and do this. Let's take. Let's open up the center. And I have pawn to f4 next. Yeah, pawn to f4. If check, I'll just sidestep. Let's attack. I have king h1 if check. Yeah, my opponent wasn't going to, survive this. So let's just go through one or two things to see other possibilities. Here's how the game started. d4, d6. Probably my opponent was expecting me to play the typical queen's gambit setup so that they could play the king's Indian defense, which goes as follows. After knight c3, black usually plays g6, and after something like pawn to e4, they play bishop g7, knight f3, castle short, bishop e2, then pawn to e5. This is what most people do. And frankly speaking, you might think taking here is a plus for white, but nope. After pawn takes, queen takes, and rook takes, never should you think that the e5 pawn is a free pawn. Nope, there's always knight takes e4 in the king's Indian. I guess this is what my opponent was expecting to see, but I kind of surprised them by turning the game into the Pirc. So after d6, instead of playing c4, I switched over to the knight c3 variation because I knew that my opponent really wanted to play the king's Indian defense somehow, just out of intuition, you guys. So after knight f6, I played pawn to e4. The difference between the Pirc and the king's Indian is the presence of the c4 pawn. You can see if white's pawn is on c4, this becomes the king's Indian. If there is no pawn on c4, you can call this structure the Pirc defense or something like that. Can be the modern depending on the variation. My opponent played pawn to g6 and I played the brilliant variation of the Pirc, which is one of my favorite lines, bishop g7, and I played e5. All I wanted was to checkmate my opponent very quickly after pawn takes, queen takes, rook takes, knight g4, and pawn to h3. This is a little trap in the Byrne variation that most people overlook. Point is, if they take on e5 with their knight, now the game begins with knight d5. Point is to take on c7 and win the rook. So if they play knight s6 trying to stop that, you go bishop takes, and after pawn takes you have knight takes. Only move is for their king to move, and then you checkmate them like this. That's what I prepared to do against my opponent, but that didn't work. And I guess you already know that Baron variation trap. When I played pawn to e5 back on move 5, my opponent played knight f d7. This is one of the refutations of the Baron, and I need you guys to pay extra attention. Of course, the main line is to take on d6, so that after pawn takes, you then go queen d2 and castle long. So you want to start attacking on the king side in the long run, probably even go bishop h6 as soon as possible or something like that. But this tactical line I love playing in blitz and rapid, even in bullet. Instead of taking on d6, I choose knight d5 because it is so trappy, as you saw in the live game, you guys. With knight d5, I'm just attacking the e7 pawn. I want to take it. In bullet, here is what I love doing. If black plays pawn to f, I immediately go knight f4. Point is, if black pre-moves or plays pawn takes bishop, I then go knight e6 to trap their queen. That's how I win most of my games. Well, if they see this little trick and let's say they go knight b6, first I take the f6 pawn. And after pawn takes, I then go bishop h4, knowing full and well that their next move will be pawn to g5. Now that's when I go in with my queen at times, but the most decent move is to go knight h5, attacking that so that if they take my bishop, I then take their bishop as well like that. And this is only advantageous for white. If that happens, or let's say this, you can always retreat your knight back, play bishop e2 and all that stuff. You will castle long in the long run. Also consider playing pawn to g3 so that your knight has a safe square. Once again, after d4, my opponent played d6, and then I transposed the game to the Baron variation of the Pirc. After e5, they did not take. Maybe they were afraid of the first trap I showed you in the Baron variation. That's why they played knight f d7. Then I played d5, putting more pressure on this pawn. Again, I showed you what to do if pawn to f6. You know, try this tricky line, especially in bullet and blitz. During the game, I said knight c6 is a common move in this position, trying to protect that. The only thing I want to advise, if you want that queen trap to work somehow, is just never to take on d6, because that paves the way for the black queen. So there's always room for queen a5 check if you take on d6. Taking on d6 is not much of a stretch. In fact, it's the best according to Stockfish, but you are not gonna get your queen trap. So at human level, I propose you go bishop b5. Again, the idea is just to take this knight and take on e7. But once again, if black plays pawn to f6, up to you to take on f6 or even on d6. But again, if you take on d6, forget about the queen trap. If you want to trap black's queen in blitz, also in bullet, just try knight f4, so that if they take, you go knight e6. If they don't take, again, let's say they play castle short this time. First, the best move is bishop c4, but I want to show you this funny move. Knight e6, if queen e8, you go knight takes. If that's when you go pawn to e6. But anywho, don't rely on that. I said the best move is bishop c4. This is straightforward, so that if king h8 is played, guess what? I know you're looking at the move knight e6, but this time it is knight takes g6 check, so that if pawn takes only move, now you go queen g4, intending to checkmate on the next move, like that. So that's what you're supposed to do after knight d5 if black plays knight c6. Just go bishop b5, still putting pressure on this, and after pawn to f6, you simply take, or you try this little trap. By the way, if they play knight b6 in this position, not allowing you to trap their queen, admittingly, this is not good for white, but there is still room for error at human level. You start with ef, and after ef, you go bishop h4. Again, pawn to g5 will always bring you back into the game due to knight h5. Not even queen check. Forget about queen check. That will be a 1-0 move. Just go knight h5. That threatens something. Oh, there's this intermediate move, queen e7 check, which must be met with queen e2 immediately. Remember, you want to capture that bishop. if anything. So if queen takes happens, you can take back with your knight, so that if pawn takes, you take back like that, back to square one. You have knight back to h5, g3, and knight that, or that. So these are moves to play at human level if your queen trap doesn't work. And hey, want to take your chess seriously? Simply head over to the comment section down below and find a special link to my courses that you should click. You will be redirected to my Patreon page where you can access all my wonderful courses. By the way, that's how you support this channel. And hey, if you really care about this channel and want to see us grow, click the subscribe button. Also, don't forget to turn on the bell notification icon for all my content. That way you won't miss any of my future uploads. Lastly, to get this free study PGN that I'm using in this video, simply scroll all the way down to the comment section and click the first link that you see, which will redirect you to a page that will ask you to subscribe before getting this PGN for free.